Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we're talking about Psycho.
Yes.
Which has had a 4K restoration, I believe.
Yes.
And that's why we went to see it at the Mac.
Yes. And I must say, I'm not sure I quite liked it.
Was that because we were sat too close to the screen?
It might be. But I also thought the restoration was too sharp. So, you could see, I don't know if you noticed, but it seemed like Janet Leigh had a mole removed on the upper...
On her right side of it?
Yeah.
I think you would have seen that in lower definition.
I don't think so.
I definitely did.
I don't think so.
It was quite noticeable.
I don't think so. I think this restoration brought out all of those things that would not have been visible. I've seen the film. I never noticed it before. Right? So I think it was just too sharp.
I thought it looked magnificent. I think one of the things it does point out, though, is the difference in like film stocks and kind of lighting and that kind of thing, because it becomes even more clear than it otherwise would when a certain lens is being used to make something extremely sharp and clear compared to something that makes things a little bit more murky or out of focus or a shot's being cropped. The differences from shot to shot are sometimes very noticeable.
Yes, I mean, don't get me wrong, some aspects of it I really loved, like the closing shots with Tony Perkins in the jail. I mean, just visually they were a work of art in themselves, actually.
I've seen the film a few times, and I know you have as well, but you said you haven't seen it in a while.
I haven't seen it in about 15 years.
Yeah,
so.
It's probably about the same for me. And seeing it on a big screen is all the difference.
Of course.
It really is. And I think we saw it at a big screen at university, maybe, and that's a big-ish screen. It's in a like a lecture hall, and it's being projected, but it's not the same as in a cinema. It's something really special, and those shots in particular, like that one you point out, they become something even more.
I know
in that environment.
And the thing about this film is it has so many shots like that, right? And actually, it was part of what I was thinking. I was thinking, when I first saw this film, which must have been when I was a teenager, I just didn't have. I mean, I loved it, but I didn't have the visual education to fully appreciate it, right? And actually, most of the things that impressed me now were all visual. Yeah. I mean, obviously they were narrational as well. Yeah. But for example, the aspects of the screenplay, I thought, whoa.
Yeah, so
right?
do I. Yeah.
Whereas the storytelling aspects, the visual storytelling aspects, and the visuals themselves seem to be more powerful than ever, really.
Yeah, the way that the visual dimension is used, and it's not just kind of camera work and setting, it's also acting as well, and gesture and performance. The way all that's used to reveal character and make you think differently about characters as you seem to learn more about them is extremely impressive. And particularly that's the case with Anthony Perkins, because you're constantly reevaluating what you know about him depending on a gesture that he makes or the way he reacts to something. Because the idea is you're not supposed to know what the big twist is. And so the film's called Psycho, and it's about this woman who kind of snaps. She's kind of stressed, and she's got a relationship, she's not sure where it's going, and there's this $40,000 that lands on her desk that she's supposed to take to the bank, and she goes, I could just run away with this. And the first 30 minutes or more of the film is her running away with the money, and, getting maybe in trouble with a cop, you don't know, and it's very tense, and you're thinking she's the psycho, right? That's kind of the idea. You're not expecting her to just die in the middle, and it could to be about something completely different.
Spoiler.
Yeah, exactly. Spoiling a film that's 62 years old, and it's one of the most famous films ever, but there you go. But the thing is, you meet Anthony Perkins, and obviously he's an important character, and you kind of sense that immediately with how much you meet him. But maybe not, if you didn't know anything, you maybe wouldn't think he's any more important than the cop, for instance, who you get a lot of time with.
I mean, he takes a full half hour to appear.
Yeah. But the thing is with Anthony Perkins is you are constantly learning things about him. So at the start, he initially seems timid, a bit nebbishy maybe, kind of, and not at all threatening. But then, one or two that he has this argument with his mother, and then the conversation with Marion Crane about the mother starts to reveal things, and you start to feel slightly differently about what's going on. And then he's looking at Marion Crane through the hole in the wall, and he obviously becomes the character of interest. But it's so it's partially done through the screenplay. Obviously, that conversation scene where they're having sandwiches is very important. But so much of it is gently and gradually done through setting up this guy and then looking at how he responds to things.
I think a lot of it was just done through lighting as well. So I forget the exact moment. It might have been when he's looking at the car, going down into the swamp.
Yes.
But there was a play of light shadows on his face, right? And then he was kind of smirking, on top of the shadows, and then he was anxious, but it was like you felt the lighting. Well, at one moment I thought, the lighting is doing all his acting for him, and I thought, no, it's like, it's an interplay of what he's doing with the lighting, and that's what makes it brilliant, really. And there's a lot of that because it's a very, very dark film. I mean, those scenes with the sister and the boyfriend in the motel with the lights off, it's really dark. You can barely see them. They're like outlines, really. So I think kind of the light is magnificently used here as an expressive element in conjunction, with the acting and everything else. I want to mention some things as well because, or just, what struck me anew or differently this time. The scenes in the motel room where the camera goes under the window, the opening scene.
Oh, into the window through at the start,
So, first of all, I thought that was like so magnificent that it's probably now a cliche, but it's still magnificent, right? And then, what I got more this time was that Hitchcock manages to create an ambiance of carnality, right? Like of sex, of like need that's evoked very powerfully. And of course, everybody credits, Janet Leigh because, she's so beautiful, and so on, and also in the way that she's filmed, but also John Gavin, who is very wooden, there's no other word for it, but who's got that incredibly big physique, and I think kind of, you understand what the pull is between them, and particularly why she would be pushed to steal $40,000 dollars. So that to me, and maybe it was the big screen, that you're invaded by these images, but this kind of damp, fetid sexuality, came across like kind of quite powerfully, the physicality of it, the carnality of it. So that had, it had registered, but not with the power that it did in this viewing.
I was trying to watch it, and it's an impossible exercise, as though I had never seen it before, and trying to imagine what it would be like for someone who didn't know what was going to happen, because even before I saw Psycho for the first time, I knew what was going to happen. It's extremely famous. And I find it's impossible to get into the head, I suppose, of someone who was, because the thing was, it was a twist. It was a few twists. One of the twists is she dies. Another twist is that Anthony Perkins is his mother and is the killer. And that they made appeals at the time. Don't tell people, and it's partly an appeal, and it's also part of the that's
publicity.
That's the publicity, right? Get people in. It's like Usual Suspects had the same thing. Don't tell people who Kaiser Soze is. I remember, I know because I was too young still. It's 95. Outside the cinema in Leicester Square, I think, there was the poster for Usual Suspects, which was the 5 guys in the lineup, and someone had just circled for the queue of people waiting to go in. But it's so hard to imagine. Kind of okay. I'm trying to think. If I don't know what's going to happen here, how am I supposed to be responding to Anthony Perkins and so on? And do I find it plausible? The way that the film is trying to pull a fast one on me and fake it out and not reveal what's happening and so on. Like I say, it's really hard to do that. I did find myself unconvinced by some of it. It does so feel like the film is so keen for you to... I suppose the other thing I want to say, and it's somewhere in the same ballpark, is that it was interesting watching it having seen Dressed to Kill recently.
Yes.
which we podcasted on.
So clearly influenced by.
Yeah, absolutely. And I said at the time, like, you might describe it as a Psycho rip-off. It's that close in some ways. And one of the things that we said about Dress to Kill was that there is so much in that film that is style over substance, and it's all about the shock, to the point where it has 2 dream sequences that are murders just for the shock value of them, really. And I was thinking, would I think the same thing about Psycho, seeing it with these fresh eyes in 1960? Because it is so canonised now. It's, one of the greatest films of all time and so on. Would I have thought that? So there's a lot of the film that really bored me. I think it spends a lot of time doing things that I wasn't interested in.
Like what?
Well, like a lot of the investigation, But I also am thinking, like, is that because I know where it's going and I don't care about these characters? Or is it because it is actually not that interesting? Because I did kind of feel like, ultimately, the value and the joy I got out of seeing it at the cinema today was in those few scenes that, the iconic scenes. The shower scene, the murder on the stairs, the final scene.
I must say, that's not true with me.
Yeah?
I got all kinds of different pleasures. That amazing shot of Anthony Perkins' eye, right? The composition of Tony Perkins' face as he's talking to Janet Leigh, Marion Crane, with the stuffed birds of prey behind him. And then these paintings, which both had a breast exposed, yeah? Mm-hmm. I think I never noticed it before. So, kind of visually, this is, this innocent little twerpy boy, yeah, but it's stuffed birds of prey and kind of semi-naked women. So, I noticed things like that again. The cinematography, which was magnificent. I did have this thing which might connect with that, which was how I loved being in the cinema for this screening, because there's a thing about, I thought about endurance, endurance is the wrong word, but it's the word that came to mind, yeah? That, not every moment in the film has to be a peak, right? And yet, and also, I'm quite a scaredy cat, and so if I were watching it at home, I would pause, yeah? So the way that the film was acting on me was completely different than I would had I been watching at home. And part of it had to do with the fact that you have to endure, yes, but in a very positive way, yeah. That's kind of the film has control over what it's doing to you, or even if it's with you, yeah, it still has an element of control that you take away from it when you watch it at home. So you can see things better, you can see things more clearly. You're invaded, yeah, by these very powerful things. Of course, this time around, I thought Anthony Perkins was so young and so handsome. It made the film more, that kind of boyishness, almost like hypersensitivity, his slow reaction to things, right? Because I somehow remember the performance as being kinetic. And actually it's not, it's very subtle. Like all the expressions, they're very small scale and kind of measured. Yeah, he never goes wild at any point, really. Yeah, so it's kind of like a low-key performance that has had such an impact that you think of it as a, do
you think of it, I mean, in that imagined remembrance of it, do you think of it as kind of theatrical or like twitchy? Like, that's how I would kind
of think of it as both theatrical and twitchy. And actually, it's not as neither.
No.
I think it's very subtle and it's very measured and it's very, very effective. So that, was a joy to see. The scenes with the policeman, yeah, just the size of those close-ups, right?
I think the only one who gets a close-up like that, apart from him, is the private investigator.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting. I mean, he's not a cop, and he makes it clear that he's not a cop. He says so. But there is something about that authority figure that the film wants to impose on you with those extreme close-ups.
Yes.
And in the cinema, and sat right at the front as we were, they are so big and so imposing. And particularly with the cop, you feel like everything Marion Crane is feeling.
Yes.
All the fear that everything could come undone right now.
Yes.
But then, of course, it contrasts it with the shots where he's across the road and he's just standing by his car, and he's a very small part of the frame, but he's still just as imposing in a different way. He's still got control of that scene.
Yes. I thought all of the scenes when she's buying the car, so first when she's arrested by the policeman, then when she's buying the car, the editing onto, the intercutting with the policeman, just waiting, just doing nothing, very, very effective. and suspenseful. Um, yeah, I mean, it's the only thing that I find fault with is the psychoanalytic or the fakey psychoanalytic explanation of what's happened, which seems to drag on. I'm sure it's very short, but actually it feels very long.
It's probably
stupid.
a good 5 to 10 minutes,
Yeah.
and because the film is going through this explaining, and again, this is something that Dressed to Kill absolutely copies, explaining what the malady is and what actually happened, and it's giving you, so that you don't leave with any questions, it's giving you the exact explanation of everything that you saw and who Norman was at the time and the fact that he's now not Norman. And the idea of it being a kind of a fake psychoanalysis is, I'm not sure that's quite right, because the thing is, this stuff was as it was understood at the time. It just was badly understood. And the thing is, the film and the novel that it comes from was inspired by Ed Gein, who was the serial killer in, I think, Wisconsin. And, America had its serial killers before then. But the thing about Ed Gein was he was found with women's severed heads in his shed or on his ranch or wherever it was. And this thing about that he had skin suits made out of them, that kind of thing, like skin furniture and things. So it was kind of an extra level of creepy and weird. And it was supposed that he was trying to, or planning to make a kind of skin suit of his mother, who was very overbearing and so on. And that's obviously clearly inspires the mother in this. And some of the stuff that came out was really nonsense. Like, I think there was an article in Life magazine, which had something along the lines of how he wanted to be a woman and thought he wanted to somehow change his sex and wanted to do it to himself but didn't have the confidence saying. And I think that kind of whole part of it was never substantiated. Whereas skin suits in the basement, like, absolutely was, you could see them.
I mean, the thing is, that what you're describing is so much more interesting what the film tells us, because, what the film does is it does this very 1960s television, what I see as faux psychoanalysis explanation that puts everything neatly in its place.
But I think that's kind of what I'm saying with Ed Gein. So the idea was that this incredibly weird, creepy thing had happened. The story had come out, and the idea was that people were trying to explain that way, put it in its place, and say he wanted to be a woman, he wanted to be his mother, and this kind of thing. Like, essentially, that's what the film is doing. People thought they understood this.
Yeah. Well, kind of. I think that's the problem. That's part of the problem of the way that psychoanalysis was taken up in the United States and popularized. It gives these neat, pat explanations to things that are not. That are much more interesting and that are not so pat and so on. I mean, this whole idea that he's a split personality and that, he's himself and his mother, and that his mother takes over. I mean, please, really,
Yeah.
I found it absurd. So I did. I found it absurd and done in that preachy tone of, aren't we clever because we're psychoanalysts and can understand this and make sense of everything for you. And you think, well, fuck off. I bet you there's a much more interesting explanation than what you're giving me because yours is so stupid and banal.
The psychologist character is played in such a smug way. That's part of it, I think. He's everyone else is sat down and he's up and he's walking around. And I think a lot of that is just kind of visual interest. Keep the scene moving by having him move around the place, because otherwise it would just be 5-6 people sat down in a room talking, listening to one guy even. But he does it with, as he's kind of commanding the scene and giving his speech and walking around, there's a smugness to the whole thing that is really unappealing. Yeah. And I think it's part of that.
So that was my least favorite aspect of the film. Also, the scenes with Vera Lynn and John Gavin, the sister and the boyfriend returning back to the motel. I mean, I liked them, or I could see their function, and they were beautifully filmed and so on, but perhaps there was the actors. There was something that dragged there a bit as well.
He's certainly quite weak. I think she actually gives a better performance than I remember her giving. And I think she's, you really understand, what she wants. She wants to find her sister, and she's annoyed with the people who don't seem to be helping, or.
I thought more could have been made of the relationship between the sisters. They lived together. Yeah, kind of was there conflict, jealousy, like. So some more things could have been added on there. And there's I don't know if it's a suggestion or if you're just falling in the tropes of film viewing, but I read a potential relationship developing between the sister and
the boyfriend.
But that isn't really teased out in any way, so that might just be me projecting.
Well, I mean, I felt the same thing,
Yeah.
so I don't think you're just projecting, but it's also something that might be kind of accidental.
Yeah, it might be. I mean, certainly there would be an almost incest taboo on that relationship, yeah?
Well, it wouldn't be incest. I mean, there might be an element of betrayal
well,
to it. Taking your sister's boyfriend.
Well, it depends on how it's defined, but actually the act of having slept with the sister creates the incest taboo, to sleep with the other sister. I mean, I know it's not, in the legal sense incest or in the strict definitional sense incest, but actually, a lot of canon law would have seen it as incest. You see that in the court case over Catherine of Aragon marrying, or the divorce between Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII.
Yeah.
Yes?
Okay,
So,
well, I mean, we can go back to the 1500s if you want.
Well, no, but I'm just saying.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
That it has an incestuous. Probably the reason why it wasn't drawn more, because it would be, I think, read as semi-incestuous by audiences. So I think for me, what stands out the most is, of course, the visuals, and the shower scene. Is kind of, it's been analysed to death. I don't think I can bring anything new, to it, except that in this print, I saw things more clearly, right? So, the tear in Janet Leigh's eyes, or the globule of water that may be a tear.
Yeah.
Yeah, and where the camera kind of moves out. Yeah, that was very clear. Also, sonically, as the water goes, yeah, then the volume of the water going down the tap increases, yeah, or is extracted. You hear it much more clearly and powerfully, right?
Yeah.
So kind of those elements I thought were like fantastic.
A couple of things I noticed for the first time in the shower scene were when she turns on the shower, it has a metallic screech that is very much like the strings of the score that you will then hear in a few seconds' time, which I thought, that's not accidental, right? Sound is put there deliberately, that's a bit of a shock, and it kind of presages what's to come, which I never noticed. And the other thing was, and I don't think this is to do with 4K really, I think this is something you could see in a previous version, but I think it might be to do with seeing it on such a big screen, is when she's dead and the camera is zooming out from her face, I think, I mean, it's such a minor thing to notice, and it might not even be right, but it seemed to me that it was a frozen frame for the first few frames. It becomes clearly a shot that, because the camera then pans away and moves onto the money. But when it's right up close to her face, I wondered whether that is actually a still frame that has been cropped in to extend the zoom out, if you see what I mean. It starts even closer, and as it reaches a bit further out, then it becomes a moving shot. And the other thing was, one of the reasons that you notice that it's moving is because you see her eyes move.
You
pretending to be dead.
Yeah.
Her eyes just move just a little bit.
A little bit, you notice it, yes.
Which again, I don't remember ever noticing before, and it doesn't add or take anything from the scene.
Well, actually, for me, it added to the creepiness, because you could also, you could also imagine a twitch in a dead person, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought that with the eyes open, it was very effective for me.
I was reading recently, talking about twitches of dead people, that in Burma, what used to be Burma, now Myanmar, when the British were over there, they used to burn people, a lot like cremating people, but in front, on a pyre, right? And apparently the heat causes the muscles to contract, and so dead bodies would be lying down, and then they suddenly sit up. And then the British would go and vomit and cry, and the Burmese would be going, you little pussies.
Wow. So I'm very glad we saw it on a big screen. We missed the opening credits, so we can't comment on it. I mean, we got there just as it was saying, directed by Alfred Hitchcock.
That's the Commonwealth traffic for you, the Commonwealth Games. So blame the Commonwealth.
Yeah. So I missed the opening credits. But the music, it has to be one of the great scores of all time, this Bernard Herrmann score. What you were saying about the sound in the bathroom, and then kind of, hearing it kind of musicalized sonically, later on, is part of the way that the film works, and it's incredibly, it feels so modern as well. Those sounds. Yes.
Well, I mean that kind of sound design of strings, and kind of high pitched, kind of squealing strings sort of thing, and very sharp notes has definitely had a long-term impact on horror. That is a sound you expect to hear in horror these days, and has been basically ever since Psycho, really. I guess in the films of the 70s and 80s that became kind of established. I'm not sure that you really heard it like that before then.
Yes.
Mind you, horror used to be very different, didn't it? It used to sort of not be about real people. It used to be about the monsters and the Frankensteins and so on.
Yes.
I
think this film is credited with being the first slasher film.
Yeah, it certainly gets put in that kind of, like we've talked about the first film noir, and how you sort of can't have one, but there are early examples.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of how this comes in
Yes.
with slashers. Yeah.
Yes. Though I find it more, I find the noir much more difficult. But I mind you, I'm not a big horror fan, so I don't know. But I can't think of a film where somebody literally goes with a knife slashing people like they do in this film.
Yeah, sure.
So though I'm sure, friends will offer suggestions when they listen to the podcast.
And it is one of the first films as well that, and one of the first kind of pieces of fiction that establishes the trope we were talking about in Dress to Kill, of the kind of quote-unquote man in women's clothing killing women.
Yes.
Again, I think that's really because of Ed Gein. 1957, he gets caught, and all this stuff starts happening. The novel comes out. This film comes out. I think there had been a detective novel before that had something similar, like a transvestite killer sort of thing. But this is a very, very early example, and certainly one that established that as a scary trope.
I think also, this is very interesting and thematically, and in terms also what we were talking about, Dress to Kill, basically the woman gets killed for being sexual. Because there's a suggestion of that with Janet Leigh as well, right? She's having illicit, sex. It's obviously been great fun. Yeah, she's drawn to it, she said, I'd be happy to lick the stamps, right? That line, So it's obviously something quite powerful with her. And then, of course, she gets killed in the most brutal way possible, right? And it's not because she stole the money, because the money is really the film's MacGuffin, isn't it?
Well, yeah, one of those. That's a very Hitchcock word, and this is the most Hitchcock example of it.
Yeah. So,
because Tony Perkins doesn't know anything about the money. That's the point.
Yes.
If he did, it might be different. But it's in the newspaper. He just chucks the newspaper away with everything else.
Yeah. Well, he puts it in the back of the trunk. Hitchcock plays with you at that moment. Will he pick it up? Will you see it? No. It just goes in the back of the trunk. So that's all very effective. But there is this sense, that is it Sharon Crane?
Marion Crane.
Marion Crane is a bad girl, not because she's stolen 40,000, because there are offers to redeem that. If you turn the money, nothing will happen. Yeah, but actually because she's had hot sex, outside of wedlock. So I think that is something.
And during a work day as well.
Yeah, in the middle of the day, this lantern. No wonder she gets killed, right? There is that in the film, right? Yeah. And I think it can be dismissed. It's there. And also the mama-loving boy, who we're told is not a transvestite, it also kind of plays into, I wouldn't say homophobic, but social ideas of homophobia play into the way that those characters are deployed. Yeah.
He's definitely played as feminine to some degree.
Yes.
He's not masculine, that's for sure. And he's kind of quite, I guess you'd say, sort of weak in some ways, or kind of weedy maybe. And there's one shot in particular where he's walking up the stairs at the end, towards the end, and the shot is from behind him, and there's a definite kind of feminine wiggle to the way he's walking that I don't think is an accident. I think you're meant to see it as that's a side of him or a part of him.
Yes.
And then the shot where he comes in with the wig on at the end to kill Marion and is caught. That particular shot, I think, you're seeing it with eyes 60 years on, but that it really has not aged very gracefully. That and there are some things where and leading into, I suppose, that explanation that we've discussed from the psychoanalyst, you're really cringing, I think, at some of it.
Yes. Yeah. So, and all of this to say that in spite of all of the faults, or maybe they're not faults, I mean, what I find problems with the film, which are, to me, considerable, there's also almost nothing in cinema that made me more gleeful. Like, just gave me sheer joy in the aesthetics of it, really, than some of the shots in this film.
When it got
and
to
the sequences, actually, not just the
yeah.
shots, the sequences with editing and everything, just fantastic.
Yes, that's a very correct thing to point out, is that it's in sequence and it's editing, and it's about looks back and forth and what people know and what they don't, and how it's constantly being updated. So it's all about that, which I think, I mean, that is, we talked again in just the Dressed to Kill podcast that Brian De Palma has been compared to Hitchcock, and it's not just the fact that he copied Psycho, but the scene that you loved in Dressed to Kill so much in the gallery is all about those editing patterns, going back and forth, and what is she looking at, and what is she seeing or not seeing, and what is she thinking, how's she feeling.
And actually, like that film, whole stretches of Psycho feel like a silent film. Yeah, that kind of, you're being told a story, and you're being told a story through images and sounds and without dialogue. Yeah. And it's beautiful.
And, something that I felt, particularly during the shower scene, but also a couple of others, again, those kind of iconic scenes, the conversation over dinner and the second murder. But particularly the shower scene is when it happened, and when the strings came in especially, I literally thought to myself, what a privilege. Do you know what I mean? To be watching this in a cinema. Like, it's, I was, in some ways, I was finding real issue with the film. Because I think I was bored by certain things, and I think there are elements of it that it's got really bad writing at some points, I think. Some really weird pacing. I mean, particularly, after the murder in the shower, you see in forensic detail Norman Bates clearing everything up. And to the point where I was thinking, God, what is the point of seeing all of this? Like, there is montage. There are ways to edit this down and still tell us that he's cleaned up everything meticulously.
I like that.
I get it, but I was thinking, this is taking a long time to do this, and I'm not sure that I see a significant purpose to it. And then when he gets into Arbogast's investigation after that, things start moving very quickly. I'm thinking the pacing there's something odd about this here. Despite all this, when that came in, I thought, God, what a privilege to see this in a cinema with this sound, and it's this classic scene. And it reminded me, yes, this is Psycho. Psycho is like this big and this important, and it has lasted for a reason.
Yeah.
Even if for me it does actually come down to scenes and sequences more than the entire film as a whole.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, but my God, kind of those sequences are, and some of the imagery, but sequences, and use of point of view, and just the visual storytelling. I mean, it has to be amongst the greatest ever made. So,
do you think it's Hitchcock's best?
Oh God, no.
What's his best, do you reckon? Are you going to go sight and sound on me and say it's Vertigo?
No, I really love, and now, I'm so old and stupid I'm forgetting the name of the film, but we can look it up. It's a film with Joseph Cotten where he plays a serial killer, and he goes back to his hometown. It's from 1942. Beyond a Reasonable Doubt.
Right.
Yeah, it is, I think that's just like a masterpiece of cinema. I think that's his greatest.
Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. 56, it says here.
Oh, no, sorry.
Oh, no, that's Fritz Lang. Shadow of a Doubt.
Shadow of a Doubt.
That's why I couldn't think of it.
Shadow of a Doubt. Yeah, I think that's his greatest.
Yeah. Okay.
Though, my God, he's got so many to choose from.
Well, yeah, and like all the classic directors, I haven't seen enough of them. Although I have seen a few.
Notorious is magnificent. And again, I think Notorious on a big screen must be out of this world, really.
Well, we saw it on big screen.
What did we?
I'm sure we saw. Well, we definitely podcasted on it. I'm sure we went to see it, maybe at the Electric, but.
Oh, I thought I had bought the.
Oh, I'm sure you have, but I think we saw it at the cinema. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So I love. I mean, I love almost all of them, really. I actually did one summer watched all his sound films in chronological order.
I think I remember that because you were posting about it every fucking 5 minutes.
Exactly. They were, I think even his worst has just magnificent things in them, you know. So, a kind of an affirmation of, if not the auteur theory, certainly film authorship. All right, do you want to add anything else?
Well, I mean, I'm glad that we managed to talk about it in an interesting way, or at least what I think was interesting, because one of the things I said to you, you said you want to go and see this, and I went, nah. And partly it's because I felt I'd seen it a lot, and I didn't know what I would get out of it another time, which I was definitely proved wrong, because I hadn't seen it like this, on a cinema screen like this, you know. But the other thing was, I thought, how are you going to talk about the most talked about film of all time? I think, but actually, there are things to talk about, and there are things that I got out of the experience anew I did not expect to.
And also, I think that's an ego thing, to be honest, because I think our podcast is not about being the last word on something or being right about something or having to have it's just an exploration of the experience that we had. That we think will be of interesting and informative to others.
I had no intention of being the last word. I just wondered whether we would be a word amongst all the other words.
So, I think it's the conversation that's interesting, because I feel like just in the process of having it, I feel I clarify my thoughts. I learn something, and I hope kind of people who listen to us will feel the same.
Yeah. If you do, let us know. If you don't, keep to yourself. And that is an ego thing.
All right, thank you very much for listening. We're eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we can get in touch, is Facebook and Twitter. And our website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And well done, England women, for winning the Euros a few minutes ago, which we were watching. Brilliant.
Yes.
Great to see.